Back in 2022, Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire broke the internet by releasing a film called What is a Woman? And thoughts on this movie were extraordinarily controversial, depending on which side of the political aisle you sit on, or at least that's what they want you to think, that you have to sit on a specific side of the political aisle to have an opinion about things like what are a woman? And now Matt Walsh is back with another new film called Am I Racist? And I can guarantee that this is going to be controversial as well. The question is, will the media even acknowledge it exists? And I think that they might have to, because the Daily Wire has taken a gamble with this film and decided to release it in theaters. I thought it was coming straight to streaming like the last film, but it's not. It's going into the movie theaters, so people are going to have to pay to see this up front. And the question is, will people show up for it? And if so, are people outside of the Daily Wire community going to enjoy this film? Or are the critics going to get out their pitchforks and come after this one like they did What is a Woman? I decided to take the gamble, get controversial, and go watch this movie. So buckle up, sit down, and let me talk about it for a little bit.
Never thought much about race. Sure, you noticed, but never really seemed to matter that much. At least not to me.
Being a white, straight, cisgender man, it's the top of the pile.
I'm on the top of the pile. That's me. Am I racist?
Now, one thing I wanted to do that we've never done before is mix things up a little bit. We're doing a review just from me. This is technically a Criticless Cast unhinged review, so I might cut loose a little bit on this one, but it's just going to be me. It's going to be shorter than normal, and we might do this from time to time, especially on down weeks where there's not a big blockbuster that's out. So we're going to try different things, and this is one of them. So I wanted to talk about this movie. It's going to be ridiculous, and I actually have not watched it yet, and technically, as of right now, my movie has already started, and the trailers are running, but who cares? The theater's right down the street. So I wanted to give my upfront thoughts on what I think about this before actually going into the movie theater. So I am a little nervous about this one because I just don't know what to expect. Matt Walsh is ridiculous and over the top. And honestly, I do appreciate some of the things that they are doing. Do I absolutely love the Daily Wire and believe in every last thing that they do? No, I don't. But do I think they're trying to attack culture, talk about controversial issues, and call light to certain things that might or might not be problematic? Yeah. And this is one that I'm really interested in. And What is a Woman ended up being a phenomenal film that really challenged expectations. Was it perfect? No. But as far as a first-time documentary for this guy, he knocked it out of the park and really just challenged a lot of the narratives, which I think need to happen regardless of which political aisle you stand on. I think narratives need to be challenged, institutions need to be challenged. It's become rhetoric to call everyone racist, whether they're racist or not.
Let's be clear, what's happening in this country, it's Nazism. Republicans are Nazis. You cannot separate yourselves from the bad white people.
To redefine things that's happening of late and propagandizing all of these issues and making them far more controversial than a lot of everyday Americans think that they should be. And I think that this is going to be an interesting film. The question is, does he lean too far into the comedy? Does he try to make things too funny to make the movie more entertaining? Or does he dig into the facts? And maybe it is better to make something like this a little bit more comedic because it's such a hot button issue and these are hard things to talk about, just like What is a Woman is. This is more of a documentary style film with him kind of masquerading as this, you know, quote unquote, like woke individual, this person that's going to fit into these groups and where they discuss race and things like this and the white fragility crowd. And I'm interested to see what he challenges these people with and what he does, but I'm hoping it'll be good. I know that critics are going to come after this thing, and I'll do a little bit more research on that when we do the review, and I'll let you guys know in just a few what I thought of it. Well, I did the thing. I went and watched Am I Racist? I just got out of the theater a few minutes ago. It was a 2:15 showing in the middle of a Thursday afternoon, but there were people in there for sure. But this movie is exactly like it was presenting itself to be. It is Matt Walsh, the political commentator, well, and I should say right-wing political commentator, taking a look at the current race situation, conversation, what is happening, like I said, within our institutions, within our colleges, and educational systems, and this current, I'm just going to go ahead and call it a grift of DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a hyperanalyzation of race through a very specific lens from a very specific viewpoint, and depending on which side of the aisle you lean on, probably depends on where you view this.
Can I just say one last thing? Can I just propose a toast? Just raise a glass if you're racist. And that's the thing.
Cheers. Oh, I'm not racist. Let me
To racist. Well, all the rest of it. To racist.
But I think over time, people have started seeing this for more of what it is. And that's kind of what Matt was trying to get at here, is trying to open up to a broader audience of dissecting DEI, looking at this anti-racist lens, and looking at this entire movement, I guess you could say, and trying to decipher what the leaders of thought in this space think. And that is what Matt does, is go and talk to some of these individuals like Robin DiAngelo, who wrote the book White Fragility. She is in this along with several other people. But it is exactly how it posed itself to be, and was more of a comedy like I mentioned earlier. But what I want to do first is go ahead and kind of bring up my Criticalist review. And if you are not a Criticalist user, make sure to do it. And if you've seen this, drop a review right now. Go to criticalist.com, or you can find us in the Android or Apple stores. We're an entertainment reviewing platform. But I've got the movie pulled up here, and I'm not going to rate it quite yet. But what I wanted to do is go down to our themes and kind of let you guys know my thoughts. As far as I can gather, there wasn't any language in this. This is a PG-13 movie, if I am not mistaken. I can check right here, so I don't have to leave my page. Yes, it is. So it was a PG-13 movie. I'm not entirely sure why outside of subject matter, but I didn't catch any. Actually, no, there were a few cuss words, so I'll say a bit. Oh, wait, no, I think there was an F-bomb, actually, so we'll at least say a bit. But as far as nudity, sexual content, there was none. Family friendliness, this one's going to be interesting because you can kind of, I give it at least a maybe to very, honestly, outside of the cuss word that's in it, but at the same time, I don't know that I would show this to kids just because of where I sit with the race discussion. And this is all a personal preference thing. And if you want more of this to be discussed within your family, but teenagers would definitely be fine. Honestly, even like 12-year-olds or so. So it's the PG-13 is not a terrible rating, even just as far as the subject matter of digging into race like this. Now, granted, if you are to watch the film, then there are individuals that say that you need to be having hyper-race discussions with your children before the age of 1. So if that tells you anything about some of the things that are dredged up in this movie. As far as violence, there is none. Political bias. Now, this is an interesting thing here because there definitely is going to be some, and if you were a left-winger, you would put this on very right, hands down, easy to gauge that right out of the gate. But I would say slightly right, because the end message here, I think, and what he's going for is to attempt to be a little more unbiased while calling attention to almost the comedic nature of this movement and how unserious the people are that are pushing it. Now, as far as entertainment value, I'll go into a bit more to a lot, somewhere in that range. I'm not going to say a ton. This didn't blow my socks off. It wasn't the most exciting movie I've ever seen. It is a documentary style film, but one thing I want to mention, and I did a little bit earlier, is it's done in more of that Borat-y style of him playing this character. But as far as how you think that is achieved or how well it's done, mileage is going to vary, but I'd put it in a bit to a bit more, somewhere in there. And so now, as far as actually scoring this movie, because I was kind of thinking about it while watching it and thinking about kind of my mindset, I don't think this is perfect. Is this what is a woman? Is it on that same level, on the par of that film? I don't think so. Is this going to make the impact that that movie did? I really don't think so, and that kind of really is going to control my judgment on it. I'm going to put this somewhere in the low 60s, honestly. It didn't totally blow my socks off, but it wasn't bad, and I do have to commend him for trying to go after this. Granted, I mean, you would normally call this, for a lot of people, a risk or stepping out on a ledge to make a film like this, but we all know Matt Walsh's thoughts. He's not putting himself in any more harm by creating this than he would have been otherwise, because the people that are going to hate him for making this are going to hate him regardless. But I do think that these are conversations that need to be had, and so I definitely commend him on that. But like I said, it didn't blow my socks off. If you were to ask me about my opinions of What is a Woman, my score would be much higher. I think that there is a bit of this film that flounders. There's a little bit that just doesn't quite hit in the way that he was wanting it to. So for me, this sits somewhere in the lower 60s range, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just more of a, you need to know this and know that you're going to have to pay to go to the theater, at least for now. This will probably show up on the Daily Wire before too long. Now, granted, that's the thing, though, is If you don't want to subscribe to the Daily Wire and you're intrigued by watching this, I would say, hey, yeah, why not? Like, go check a matinee of this or wait till it comes out at home. But the thing is that you're probably not going to get a whole lot of new tidbits of information or at least wall-to-wall information like you did with the other film that he made, simply because I think that a lot more time is spent kind of on the goofy side of Matt Walsh and him kind of poking fun and leaning into the joke that these people are. Because that is really the biggest thing, is there are moments that shine in this movie where Matt is able to get interviews with some of the thought leaders in this space and really just allow them to say the things that they are saying behind closed doors, and not even behind closed doors, technically in the public, but in these paid arenas, because it turns out that a lot of these people are paid to do these speaking engagements, whether it's a dinner for white women to basically just assault them and berate them for hours and tell them how they should be ashamed of being themselves, or whether it is just a one-on-one where you sit down with someone and they tell you about their lived experiences, or whether it is sitting with someone like Robin DiAngelo, who has written all these books and is at the root of a whole lot of this DEI movement, who comes out and admits that she has worked with many, many large companies to help sway them in their business world and how their companies are operating. And it shows if you watch a lot of the big tech companies and how obsessed with race they've become. And I do feel like talking about this movie is a little bit of a tightrope, because this is a lot of things that I haven't talked about a lot in public, and I didn't really want to get hyper political about it. Just more of a discussion of does this succeed at its goal? Is it overly biased? And that's one of the big things that I like to focus on with Criticalist. And if you take a look at our merch and just overall with how we've handled the site and certain things with how we handle ourselves in general, is a focus on propaganda. And that's always been my biggest issue, is propaganda. And it can come from the right, the left, center, wherever you want it to come from. There is typically an agenda. And it's why I quite often have issues with documentaries, is that they regularly have an agenda. And this one does have an agenda, but as with our political bias scale, you know, I pointed out it does lean right, and you could technically even argue that it leans far right. Now, I wouldn't fight you on it. But on the same hand, one thing that I want to focus on is something that Matt Walsh says early on in the movie. Matt claims that, you know, he talks about how he was born in the 80s, he's an 80s, 90s kid, and growing up, race wasn't discussed like it is now. It wasn't something that you pointed out or focused on. You just kind of saw everybody the same. And honestly, I've had this conversation with many people, but as a straight white man, the boogeyman at the top of the pile here, as they point out many times in this, and growing up in the South, deep in the South, it still was not an issue. And actually, a lot of my role models were black men, and in different spaces, whether it be sports or entertainment, there was a lot of room to shine, I think, for black actors and sports players and all sorts of things in the 80s and 90s, and nothing came up about race, rarely ever. And now it seems to be this hyper focus, and that's what Matt is trying to focus on and hone everybody towards, is this concerted effort to hyper focus on race. And not only that, but attack white people specifically and talk about it being systemic and it being all encompassing and at the roots of America, and just engulfing everything and every action that happens within America. And the thing is if you grew up in the 80s or 90s and you are honest, then you'd realize that that's not what was happening. It's that this grift has started, and it just couldn't be stopped. And it's just kind of been this force that's been steamrolling everything and growing over the years, like I said, within colleges and elsewhere. And the propaganda is high. And that's one of the things that Matt focuses on here, is showing clip after clip after clip of news outlets talking about this stuff, of film and different places focusing on this conversation, this hyperfixation on race and why white people should feel guilty, should feel terrible for their race. And the thing is behind closed doors is where this movie's going to shine. And it's Matt getting a camera into places where most people wouldn't get them, and in front of people that wouldn't expose themselves quite in this way. And when they do, it is embarrassing. It is the definition of racism, what's happening with these people and these conversations about what they consider to be positive race conversations. And at its core, it is racist, and it is cringeworthy and hard to watch. But what I think needs to be also discussed here is that a lot of this film kind of flounders a bit. There's some slow moments. There's some really leaning into Matt's bits and him being goofy and silly and just kind of making an ass of himself, pretending to be this woke dude in these spaces. And it's kind of unnecessary. You guys got the cameras in there. Why did you have to do some of this and lean into the bit so hard? Because I think there could have been a lot more just meat put on these bones versus Matt doing his slapsticky thing, and it just didn't work for me very well. As far as a film and how it was constructed, it's fairly well made. It's a documentary, you know, it looks good. It keeps the pace up for the most part, but there are some bits that run on way too long and some that just didn't even really need to be there. He makes fun of Jussie Smollett, which is fine. Go ahead. And the acts that were taken when he decided to claim that there was a race-based attack on him, and it turned out to not be true, but he kind of stages his own version of it, and it just didn't need to be in the film. There are certain moments like that where I feel like the movie could have been trimmed way down, but there wouldn't have been a lot left to it. There are just these several hot moments that really stand out and I think make the movie worth watching and drawing a light to, and having people who aren't aware of how invasive this is. But I don't think that this really does dig into the issue as well as it could and draw a light to it and show to people from the outside that don't know that this is happening, that don't believe in it, that because we've also heard lately in the media that DEI is a myth, that, you know, it's not as prevalent as it is, because they're trying to kind of sweep it under the rug while pushing it at the same time. It's a very weird thing, but it's a very effective way to propagandize, is to gaslight. And that's been a lot of the stuff that's been happening with this movement, is to gaslight people when they point it out, and then do the number one biggest thing is call you a racist. And that is also another thing that Matt points out in here and tries to hone in on. And I think he does an okay job of it. But as far as the leaps and bounds that he made with the gender ideology conversation with what is a woman, that's not going to happen in this film. He just didn't do it. I'm sorry. It just didn't hit the way that one did. And I think it's because of the lean into the comedic side of this. And that's a shame. And I just don't know that it fully worked. I don't know that this is going to get the effect that the last one did, and it's not going to grab people the same way. I think that people will have a fun enough time, and I think that he did a good job even of going to the Deep South and interviewing these people who are hyper racist. And this is a conversation that comes up a lot with me growing up in the South and living my entire life here, is that a lot of the things that they accuse people of is just not true anymore. And one of the guys in the movie kind of points out, he's like, oh, well, I had multiple members of my family who were Klans members, and it didn't affect me at all. And I'm not a racist, and I have no problem with people of other races. And that tends to be the case. And I've seen that a lot with the people that I've been surrounded with in my life, is that a lot of the older folks were more racist. And then as time goes on, they became less racist. And then the people connected to them realized that it wasn't great, it was wrong, and aren't that way. And I think we've made a lot of leaps and bounds with the race discussions without having all of this injected into every aspect of culture and just gassing up this hate machine. And I think that that's the biggest thing that we need to hone in on, is the propaganda here that's happening around this. And that's what I think Matt should have put more of a focus on, and just the never-ending propaganda that people are getting bombarded with, and this messaging. Now, he did do a great job of making them look foolish, but at the same time, I think that there was just a lot more directions that he could have headed in and put more actual meat onto this instead of leaning into the Borat thing. But all in all, this was a totally fine watch. It wasn't bad. I can't say that he's done it again, because I don't know that he quite has, but he did make an entertaining and watchable film that draws a light on some of the problems that are happening within America and even expanding outwards, because this is boiling out into other countries, but we are kind of the root of this, and a lot of it is happening here, and it's happening on an institutional level, which is what's funny, is that that's the accusation that is currently spread, is that the racism is on an institutional level. And I would argue, yes it is, but it's because you're adopting all of this ideology and all of this mindset versus and trying to drum up and create problems where they're not nearly as bad as you paint them out to be. And at the end of the day, that's what Matt was trying to say, and hopefully people will get that from this. And I hope that, my interpretation of this, whether it was propaganda, whether it was pushing an agenda, I hope that I was able to kind of parse out out and explain to you guys my take on that, because I was a little nervous to even talk about this movie in general just because of how political it technically is. But these are conversations that do need to be had, and luckily I think more and more people are becoming open to it, and there are many people around the world, and especially in the United States, who are starting to realize that this division is not worth it, that the fighting is not worth it, and that it is these elite powers, whether it be, well, really it just comes down to government and everything surrounding that want to keep us divided, that want to keep us separated, keep us fighting one another instead of having positive conversations. And that's the thing, is when you see these people in this film trying to teach people about race, and it's embarrassing because they just sound like some of the most racist people you've ever heard. It's a lot of the talk that was probably happening in Klans rallies, just happening in a different direction, aimed in a different way. And that is embarrassing. And I hope that this film calls a light on that, and that people see that, because we don't need to be divided. This is not a time for that. As the government expands and grows and just keeps gobbling up more and more all over the world, and these controlling powers, the last thing we need to do is be divided by something as ridiculous as race. That's not at the core of this. It doesn't need to be this hyperfixation, and there doesn't need to be this guilt for the way that you were born, the way that you look. And it's reached a point where these people are even shaming folks like Martin Luther King, but we're somehow going backwards. It's like, I want positive discussions. I want people to be able to come together and sit down and have the hard conversations and talk about the problems that they have. And everybody does have a lived experience technically, and everybody's is going to be different. But a lot of these movements try to paint everybody in the same lane based off different demographics, and that is just wild and ridiculous. And we need to get back to some level of normalcy, and maybe films like this will help open people's eyes, and let's just have better conversations here. So jump on Criticalist to leave your review. Do the same down in the comments. Give us a link to your review on Criticalist and tell us where to go to check yours out, and we want to know what you're thinking. So let's have positive, good conversations, and until next time, guys, I'll be back here on Monday to do the news, and as always, subscribe, like, everything else, and we will see you here later.